Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
Katerina Bannock loved her ex-sister-in-law. Ophelia was smart, beautiful, and kind. According to Ophelia, her brother Gabriel was all of those things as well, but all Kat saw was a boy who'd ignored the best thing that ever happened to him to pursue whim after whim. She was more frustrated than saddened after he got partially eaten by a ghoul, even though Ophelia moped about until she fell in love with her ghost fiancé, but that was later. For Kat, Gabriel dying was just one more undeserved punishment he inflicted on her best friend. They had kept Gabriel's body in a freezer Ophelia had bought at Costco to hold her meat and dairy. They hadn't been able to get one of the uprights, so they had to fold him up and put him in their cheap chest one. His body was primarily intact. She had been able to transfer it from the Gull's walk-in fridge to Ophelia's basement before he had succumbed to rigor mortis, which was good, as it would have been much more difficult for the two of them to carry if he had been stiff. The bite the ghoul had taken out of his shoulder had bled sluggishly, and a large tortilla had frozen to it. After trying to pull it off, Kat convinced Ophelia to just leave it there. It was also far from the first time they had to carry Gabriel's body into Ophelia's house. He would be out partying for days on end, or go camping, which is what he called his benders in the woods, for weeks, until they had to go pick him up at whatever park ranger station he'd been brought to. For a while, Ophelia had kept an old wheelchair in the garage and a small ramp, but she had put it on the curb under Kat's insistence the third time he had been dumped in front of her house by his buddies after the divorce.
I miss the wheelchair,
Ophelia had said when they were lugging his corpse out of Kat's Honda's back seat. She had the head and shoulders while Kat had the feet. Kat had offered to carry the torso, but Ophelia wouldn't be parted from the head. They had made the entire hour-long trip from the ghoul's mountain cabin with Gabriel's head in his ex-wife's lap, because Ophelia had said it would look natural. "Do you think he'll turn into a ghoul or a vampire?" Kat asked, ignoring her.
I don't think I could cut off his head and stab him with a knife.
They had made it to the kitchen by that point. "I thought it was a steak."
Read Dracula again. It's a big Bowie knife.
"I think we should do it anyway, just in case." Kat went first down the stairs. Ophelia was bigger, but Kat was freakishly strong for her size. Kat tried to explain to her friend that mass was more important, but that just got glares. Reading other people had never been Kat's strong suit.
You're his sister. You do it.
"I think it would give you closure." Ophelia carefully put her head down, dragging an old dog bed over with her foot to cushion it. Kat dropped his feet and grabbed some old coolers that had been piling up in the basement. Every time he had gone camping, Gabriel had bought a couple new ones and stuffed it with alcohol and frozen pizzas that he would put his mushrooms on. They tasted terrible, even if you were drunk enough to eat them half-thawed. Together, they emptied the freezer into the coolers. They stuffed them full, but they still had too much left over to fit in Ophelia's fridge. After arguing with a silent Ophelia, Kat sent out a blast for a barbecue. Eating it later with their friends, Ophelia complained how she felt like Hitchcock was going to show up at their party. It was hard for her over the next few months. Eventually, on a trip to the North Carolina coast, after a stay in a man-eating boutique hotel, she met an ancient ghost who she fell in love with. Sure, he'd been killed by a skinwalker 400 years before, but unlike Gabriel, he was a perfect gentleman. Kat supposed that James was a safe choice, even if he did have a thick accent and absolutely awful attitude towards women, and no actual physical body. Ophelia never felt as if she was cheating on Gabriel. After all, it would be impossible to do so, physically. Eventually, she forgot about his body in the freezer, except when the power went out and the little generator filled her basement with fumes. When it was her turn to refuel it, Kat would suggest just leaving him out in the woods. By this point, everyone who knew him expected him to be found dead of exposure and half-eaten by scavengers.
He's going to get freezer burn.
She'd say, "Does it really matter? It's not like we're gonna eat him."
I don't want my husband to be hurt anymore.
While dating a ghost suited her for some time, after the months went by and James became more socialized, Ophelia began to want to go out on dates. Normally, he would join her for dinner or a movie, but no one else could see him. Getting a Bluetooth earpiece helped, but she got worse glares for that than when she had just seemed to be talking to herself. It was Kat who came up with the obvious solution. "We have my brother's body, and it's in unreasonably good condition, right?
Yes?
James needs a body so you two can bump uglies, play with each other's fun bits, have sex.
Show affection. Yes.
So we thaw Gabriel and James can possess him. He's a ghost. That's what ghosts do."
What if it doesn't work? We can't refreeze him.
"Then it's a win-win. Your boyfriend might get a new body, and we'll get to clear out the space in the freezer." Convincing James to go along with the plan was easy. He'd been incorporeal since the early 1600s and missed having a body, even the gross bits. There was a bit of a problem with the fact that Gabriel was stone dead, but Kat got some jumper cables and pumped some juice into him. That got the heart working just enough that James could jump in. He was stiff at first. They hadn't been able to thaw Gabriel evenly. A warm bath worked well on the extremities at first, but getting the insides warm enough had caused the ligaments to get floppy. The tortilla covering the bite taken out of his shoulder came loose, and he was oozing blood into the bath as well. His brain was a mess. The neurons had all been pulped when they froze, like a tomato left in a refrigerator. But that turned out to be for the best, as James didn't have to contend with any of Gabriel's memories seeping in. Ophelia and James got married, but to everyone else, it looked like Gabriel and Ophelia were getting remarried. Something everyone had been dreading and expecting since their divorce. Some of their friends showed up to the reception because the food promised to be good, but mostly to lay bets on how long it would last. So far, they have outlasted every wager. Kat was really excited to be able to use the freezer again, but Ophelia made her wash it out a couple times first.
25 years ago, I became the United States Attorney for the Northern District of Illinois. Brash, arrogant, cocky, and brilliant. I could do no wrong. I prosecuted organized crime figures, brought down corrupt Chicago politicians, and started the first anti-terrorist department in the central United States. As my reputation grew within the U.S. Attorney's Office, I knew it would only be a matter of time before I would be elevated to the Washington, D.C. scene and become the United States Attorney General. It was a lock, or so I thought. My law diploma from the University of Chicago, where I graduated first in my class, showed my name to be J. Wendell Boyd. Associates called me Wendell. Others referred to me as Mr. Boyd. I was at the top of my game. Then, 20 years ago, Aaron Morton walked into my office and changed my life. And I might add, not for the better. I probably should explain. During the first 5 years of my tenure as United States Attorney, Chicago became plagued by a horrendous series of gruesome murders. Since they all occurred in Chicago, their district attorney oversaw the investigation and potential prosecution. While I knew about the homicides, I had other matters on my plate. On October 21st, exactly 20 years ago to this day, my assistant rushed into my office, followed by a clean-shaven, skinny fellow with neatly trimmed blonde hair. I looked over my glasses and stared at the newcomer as he stood in front of my desk. Professionally dressed in a navy pinstripe suit, white silk shirt, and a red and gold tie, he looked and sounded like a successful businessman from the East Coast. "Sir, my name is Aaron Morton. I am a serial killer, and I am here to turn myself in and make a deal." After his surprise statement, I glanced at my assistant, who stood off to the side and appeared ready to soil his pants. I pointed at one of the leather wingback chairs in front of my desk. "Have a seat." After he sat, he crossed his legs at the knee, leaned back and offered me a half smile. "Did you hear me?" "I heard you, but you'll have to give me a few more details before I can determine my response." "Ah, a skeptic." "No, I am busy and do not have time nor the inclination to play games." "Very well. I am the person responsible for the deaths of 10 men and 10 women. I try to be an equal opportunity killer. I am a trained surgeon, and if you have been reading the newspapers, you will realize all of the victims were dismembered." I leaned back in my chair and brought my arms up to make a steeple with my fingers, tapping my lips. I could feel my heart start to pound. Taking a calming breath, I tried to keep my expression as neutral as possible before I spoke. "Okay, you have my attention, but sources tell me there are only a total of 10 victims. 10 the Chicago police know about. You see, I targeted my prey in your northern Illinois district. I have designed it so the investigation will fall explicitly under your jurisdiction." This revelation gave me pause. I kept my fingers on my lips and stared at the man as he displayed a smile that sent chills down my spine. He continued, "Also, what has not been reported in the media is that of the bodies already discovered, there are various parts missing. They are not complete. Let's just say I've retained souvenirs." I sat up straighter. The hairs on the back of my neck stood and I struggled to catch my breath. The reports I received indicated this very fact. The police intentionally withheld this information pending locating a person of interest, but they only knew of 10 victims. He raised an eyebrow. "Ah, I finally have your attention." Regaining my composure with a slight smile, I looked at my assistant who had not taken his eyes off the man, nor had he moved. "Greg." He blinked several times and finally looked at me. I said, "Would you be so kind as to ask Assistant Attorney Jeffries to join us?" "Yes, sir." After Greg left the office, Morton said, "I will only give my statement to you. You can have as many witnesses as you like, but I will not address anyone but you." "Why?" With a relaxed demeanor, he folded his arms and smiled. "I have my reasons. Until we know for sure about the other victims, I won't be involved." He leaned forward. "Oh, but you have to be involved. You see, your presence will give my crimes the status they deserve." "Do they?" "Wait and see." After a week of following directions provided by Morton, 10 additional bodies were discovered, and the matter did indeed fall under my jurisdiction. I accompanied state and local police plus a state medical examiner to the last 5 sites. I did this because I knew I would have to lead the prosecution of this monster. What I saw at these sites will haunt me until my final days. Once we recovered the last body, I scheduled an interview with Morton, a meeting which did not go well for me. I was escorted into the interrogation room before he arrived. As they brought him in, I almost gasped at the change in his appearance. "I take it you don't like my new look, Boyd? Are you trying to mimic Charles Manson, Aaron?" "Manson was an amateur." Morton's charade as a professional businessman no longer existed. In place of the well-groomed aristocrat, a disheveled, wild-eyed crazy man sat in front of me. His once neatly groomed blonde hair appeared to have been self-cut and at odd and varying lengths. A thick blondish red mustache and goatee now adorned the once clean-shaven face. Tattooed on his left cheek were the words, "I am." On his right cheek, the word, "God." "A little pretentious with your new tattoos, aren't you, Aaron?" "Am I? Who among us has shown the power of life and death over his fellow man, counselor?" With a slight smile, I said, "A jury of your peers?" "Yes, But the process is so lengthy it borders on the absurd. I, on the other hand, can strike at any time and at anybody. I believe the proper tense would be could. For now. I kept my expression neutral as a chill swept over me. Shaking off the feeling his words might be prophetic, I asked, "Do you want a lawyer?" "No." "Are you going to defend yourself?" He only nodded. "How did you choose your victims?" "Excellent question." I said nothing as I waited for his response. "The men were simply random. If I didn't like their looks or attitude, well, you know." "No, I don't, Aaron. Enlighten me." "Have you checked their backgrounds?" "Of the ones we can identify, yes." "Ah." He gave me a wicked smile and changed the subject. "Amazing how important a face and hands can be in learning who someone is. Would you agree?" If I remember correctly, I did not respond. "The women were chosen for 2 reasons. First, they had to be attractive. Second, they also needed to have money. Age did not matter." "Go on." "I seduced them, counselor. Once I secured access to their money, well, you saw what happened." "Where are the missing body parts?" "Safe." It took every fiber of my being not to reach over the desk and strangle this monster sitting across from me. His flippant disregard for his victims shook the very core of my humanity. After taking a deep breath, I said, "When are you going to tell me where this safe place is?" He just sat there and gave me a smug smile. Following this, I performed a very unprofessional act. I stood, walked around, and slapped him. "Do you want a drink?" "Sure, whatever you're having." My father, the Honorable Preston Elwood Boyd, federal appeals judge, said, "Johnny Walker Black it is." I heard the clink of 2 ice cubes in a crystal glass, followed by the same sound a second time. I sat in a wingback leather chair positioned in front of his desk at his home office. He handed me my cocktail as I stared at his law library, which occupied the wall on 2 sides of his office. He then sat behind his massive oak desk and said, "Why did you slap him?" After taking a sip, I studied the liquid in my glass for a few moments. I've been trying to determine the reason ever since it happened. To be honest with you, Father, I don't have a clue. Your mother, God rest her soul, would be pleased you did. I, on the other hand, am surprised you allowed him to get to you. I'm not proud of it. Have you recused yourself? I tried. He won't talk to anyone but me. Then you are facing a legal conundrum. Obviously. Who is this man? He refuses to tell us anything about himself. What we do know, we've been able to piece together. The only background he provided came from a statement he made the first time I spoke to him. He told me he was a trained surgeon. Interesting. It took a while, but one of our investigators determined he dropped out of medical school just before starting his residency at Mount Sinai. Did he have a specialty? Yes, orthopedic surgery. According to our investigator, his grades as a student in medical school were mediocre. In fact, he barely passed. I suppose someone has to be at the bottom of their class? Yes, but he strikes me as highly intelligent. My father remained quiet for a long time. Finally, he asked, "Are you here seeking my advice?" I nodded as I took another sip of my scotch. I enjoy your company, but tonight, it's the reason I'm here. Continue as the main prosecutor, only never be in the same room with him alone. Always have a witness. Wise counsel, Father. The trial of Aaron Morton commenced exactly 1 year from the date he first walked into my office. The court, refusing to allow Morton to represent himself, appointed an attorney from a large firm in Chicago. The trial lasted 3 weeks. My nightmares started the same day we seated a jury. As the chief prosecutor for the Northern District of Illinois, I normally acted as a supervisor for my team and rarely got involved as the lead on a case. With the Aaron Morton trial, I stepped back into my role as a practicing prosecutor. Because of this, I immersed myself into the details of the 20 victims, their lives, their families, and their ultimate gruesome deaths. From what the autopsies revealed, all 20 individuals died a slow and drawn-out demise. Using his training as a physician, Morton kept each one of them alive as long as possible while he dismembered them. I still have trouble discussing this fact, even 20 years later. My argument to the jury began with my opening statement, which summarized the life of each victim prior to crossing paths with this monster. After I finished, I sat and waited for the defense's turn. Morton's attorney stood, turned to the jury and said, "My client concedes the events described by Mr. Boyd did occur." The judge blinked several times, shook his head and asked, "Mr. Turner, is your client changing his plea to guilty at this time?" "No, Your Honor, but he does not contest the information presented by Mr. Boyd." The trial grew more surreal from this point on. Turner never offered a hint of a defense. I, as prosecutor, presented the jury with 2.5 weeks of grisly testimony. I subjected family members of the victims to reliving the loss of their loved ones and how their deaths affected each of them. During my presentation, I would glance at the defendant occasionally to emphasize a point. Every time I did this, he appeared to be enjoying the description of his ghastly acts. When I rested my case, I was utterly and literally drained. The passion I normally felt for my job washed away in the flood of depravity coming from the black soul of Aaron Morton. I could not make myself give the prosecution's closing remarks. I turned those duties over to an assistant. Morton's attorney, Michael Turner, offered only one witness for the defense, Aaron Morton. After he was sworn in, Turner asked him to tell the jury his side of the story. I will never forget what happened next. Morton turned, stared at each member of the jury, and said the following with a devilish smile. "I've been lying to my attorney from the beginning. It happened exactly like J. Wendell Boyd said." Chaos broke out in the courtroom as reporters scrambled out to find a phone or get in front of a camera. I remember the judge banging his gavel on the desk in a vain attempt to quiet the room. Finally, in a desperate move, he ordered the bailiffs to remove Morton from the premises. I remember clasping my hands together in front of me and staring blankly at the tabletop. Thoughts of resigning my position started to formulate in my head as I sat there. Before the commotion caused by Morton's statement settled down, I made the decision I never wanted to deal with anyone like Aaron Morton again. Sentencing for the monster occurred 3 months later. Dressed in an orange prison jumpsuit, his hands and legs shackled, he stood at the defendant's table, this time with a rookie public defender standing beside him. They both fixed their attention on the judge. With a condemning glare, Judge Kevin Mayer clasped his hands together and asked, "Before I announce the state's sentence on your actions, Mr. Morton, do you have anything to say?" Morton did not hesitate. He turned and stared directly at me. "This isn't over, Boyd. You will never be rid of me. Even in death, I will haunt you for eternity." My stomach clenched with these words. Apparently, my face displayed my sudden fear as Morton grinned devilishly and returned his attention to the judge. Rolling his eyes, Judge Mayer said, "I was hoping for an expression or hint of remorse. Obviously, you are not capable of such sentiments. Very well." He picked up a piece of paper and read, "Aaron Morton, you are accused of the brutal murders of the following Illinois citizens." He read the names slowly, making sure he mentioned each victim's spouse, siblings, or parents. "From your testimony given during these proceedings, you admit to being the cause of these senseless deaths. Therefore, this court sentences you to be put to death at the earliest possible date." Spectators in the gallery burst into applause. Mayer allowed it to go on for a few moments and then banged his gavel and asked for silence. He then paused, took his glasses off and rubbed his eyes. "If I could sentence you to 20 death sentences, I would, but I can't. Never in my 25 years on the bench have I presided over a more depraved series of acts by one person against his fellow human beings. You are an abomination. If there is a hell, surely you will dwell there for eternity. Bailiff, remove him from my sight." Once again, the gallery celebrated with applause. I have always considered myself to be intelligent and immune to the empty threats from babbling psychopaths, but the conviction in Morton's final words shook me to my core. 2 weeks later, I resigned and moved to a small town in the middle of Illinois, hundreds of miles from Chicago. My wife chose not to move with me. A year later, we divorced. Today, I am not a big city attorney anymore. I still practice law, but mundane stuff. I write real estate contracts, prepare wills, help couples adopt children, offer advice to the elderly to protect their assets with trusts, and on occasion take on insurance companies and wrongful death claims. While I do not practice criminal law anymore, I do help the good citizens in this town with traffic tickets and the occasional DUI. I am well known, well liked, and I even served as mayor for one term. But I stay away from anything dealing with the seamy or negative side of the human experience. I want no part of it. I do not go by Wendell anymore or Mr. Boyd. People here in town call me Jay. My efforts to forget the deeds of Aaron Morton have mostly failed. 5 years ago, his execution made national news. So did my involvement with his prosecution. And yes, I had to endure the notoriety of being involved with a nationally known serial killer for months. He is present in my nightmares, and I constantly see individuals on the street who remind me of the man. Not the disheveled, vulgar, tattooed individual I had to deal with during the trial, but the sophisticated professional I met in my office that first fateful day. I live in an old 2-story Victorian house several blocks off the main square. During the remodel, just before I moved in, I had the contractor prepare one half of the bottom floor as an office and reception area. Since I run a one-man shop, I only need a receptionist 3 days a week. Her name is Ruth. She and her husband moved to town several years ago after they retired. She worked in a large law firm in Chicago, knew my father before his passing, and jumped at the chance to work part-time for me. For the past 20 years, the name Aaron Morton had tried to dominate my every waking thought. For a number of years, it did. But since his execution, not so much. Until 2 months ago. On the 5th anniversary of his execution, Federal Express delivered a package to my office. While not an unusual occurrence, that particular day, Ruth walked into my office with a worried look on her face. "Jay, this just came for you." I looked up over my glasses and smiled. "What is it?" She held it like it might explode at any second. "It's from Newman, Peabody, and Schultz in Chicago." "So? Aren't they the ones who represented Aaron Morton at his trial?" I took off my glasses and studied the white and blue flat package she held in her hand. "Yes, I believe they did. However, from what I heard, they were not too pleased at taking him on as a client." I reached for the package and she handed it to me. While I did not check, I am sure the package measured 9.5 by 12.5 and it weighed practically nothing. Whatever might be in it would only be paper. Once opened, I extracted a printed letter and an old yellowed envelope. The computer-printed letter read, "To the Honorable J. Wendell Boyd, Attorney at Law. Our client, Aaron Morton, commissioned our firm to deliver this envelope on the prescribed date of September 1st, 5 years following his execution. Herein, with the delivery of this package, our obligation to Mr. Morton has been fulfilled." The letter contained the signature of what I suspected was a junior associate within the firm. They are the individuals who have to pay their dues by performing meaningless grunt work. I studied the yellowed envelope and turned it over. Only one side held writing. The back bore no markings. The front contained only 3 words, "To J. Boyd." I looked up at my assistant. "Thanks, Ruth. I'll open it later." "Very well. Let me know if there's anything I need to do about it." "I'm sure it's nothing, but thanks." After she left the room, I placed the envelope on my desk and just stared at it for a long time. How long, I do not remember. My first inclination was to burn it, but curiosity kept me from taking a match to it. Finally, after debating the pros and cons, I used a letter opener to slice open the top. A handwritten note fell out. It read, "On All Souls Day, I will return to make amends and settle old scores." Despite knowing there was nothing he could do to me from beyond the grave, these words sent a chill up my spine. Bile rose in the back of my throat, and I had to swallow hard to push it back down. The note did not contain a signature, but Aaron Morton created hundreds of handwritten pages about his victims. Before his trial, I forced myself to read them all. These manuscripts contained graphic depictions of how each victim died and his fascination as he watched them succumb to their injuries. After glancing at a calendar on my desk, I realized there were only 60 days available to figure out the meaning of his note. 20 years have passed since I last stepped foot in Chicago. My ex-wife remarried and moved to New York, so I did not have to worry about running into her. My appointment with the senior partner at Newman, Peabody & Schultz occurred 10 minutes late. Pretty good considering how hesitant he was when he made the appointment. After we shook hands in the reception area, Charles Newman said, "It's been a long time, Wendell. You look well." "As do you, Charles." He made no move to take me to a private office. I said, "Is there somewhere we can talk in private?" "Is this about the Morton case?" "It's about the letter I received." "I'm surprised you are asking about it. You, of all people, should know about attorney-client privilege." "I understand that, but since he's dead, makes no difference. This firm has fulfilled its obligation, and that is our final word. I just need to know how long you had the letter." "Sorry, Wendell." He folded his arms and made no offer to discuss the topic in private. I stared at him for a few moments. "Sorry I wasted your time." I turned and left the reception area and walked quickly to the bank of elevators. I pressed the down button and waited. Since we were on the 30th floor, I figured I had a bit of a wait. Before the door opened, a young man in a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows joined me at the door. He followed me into the elevator, punched the button for the floor just above the lobby, and said the minute the door closed, "I'm the guy who signed the letter." I glanced at him and nodded. "We've had the letter since his conviction." "That long?" "Yes." "What other instructions did he leave?" The man handed me a folded piece of paper. "Don't open that until you are out of the building." The car stopped its descent and he stepped out, holding the door open. "I'll get fired if they find out I gave you that copy." With those words, he let the doors close. I abided by the man's wishes and did not open it until I got back to my car in the parking lot. I guess I expected a lengthy letter from Morton explaining his actions. Instead, the mystery piece of paper turned out to be a receipt of payment. A receipt for the sum of $5,000 for the delivery of 2 letters. One package needed to be delivered September 1st. The second package would be delivered the day before November 1st, All Souls Day. It specified the deliveries were to be made 5 years after the execution of Aaron Morton. To whom it would be delivered did not appear on the receipt. For that matter, neither did my name. I looked back at the tall structure containing the offices of Newman, Peabody & Schultz. I now understood why Newman invoked the attorney-client privilege clause. They still had another package to deliver. Subsequent efforts to discover what the November 1st package contained failed. No one at the law firm would return my calls, so I reread the short note in Morton's handwriting over and over, trying to determine what it might mean. My imagination filled in the parts logic could not provide. The nightmares returned with vengeance. Waking up in the middle of the night soaked from sweat and my heart thumping hard in my chest is not a good way to get a good night's sleep. After the 3rd night of sleeplessness, Ruth noticed and told me I needed to see my doctor. Every time she mentioned it, I would thank her and indicate I would. I didn't. I started seeing Aaron Morton everywhere. The most startling event occurred on the Monday after the nightmares returned. As I washed my hands in the public restroom at the courthouse, I brought my eyes up to the mirror in front. A wild-eyed man stood behind me, his hair and pallor the same color as Morton's 20 years ago in the courtroom. I gasped. My heart started pounding. The specter stared at me. "What's your problem, man?" The voice bore no resemblance to Morton's. I quickly dried my hands and exited the restroom. But similar incidents occurred daily. October 31st has arrived, the day before November 1st, All Souls Day. The outside lights on my house are off. I do not wish to interact with anyone. I sit at my desk listening to the sounds of trick-or-treaters roaming the neighborhood. The sounds cause my imagination to run amok. A full bottle of Glenfiddich sits next to my left hand, which holds an empty glass. A Glock 19 is next to my right hand. Every time I hear the swishing of leaves outside my office window, I put my hand on the pistol. Then the laughter of children describing their bounty of the evening breaks the spell, and I release the weapon. Time drags slowly as the hustle and bustle of trick-or-treaters subsides with the lateness of the hour. The bottle is now half empty. Sweat trickles down my forehead, even though there is a chill in the house. Because I live so near, I rarely perceive when the bell in the steeple of the First Baptist Church a block from my house rings. Tonight, it sounds like a drum in my ears. I count the number of rings. 10, 11, and then 12. It is midnight. All Souls Day is here. Waiting for the unknown, waiting for the threat my imagination senses Morton will cause. My right hand clutches the Glock. Its weight and purpose provide a false sense of security. When the church bell ceases its incessant ringing, the house is oddly quiet. All lights in my office are extinguished. The only illumination comes from a streetlight outside which shines through a large window. The limbs of a huge oak tree sway in the breeze, causing eerie shadows to dance across the floor. My nerves twitch to the slightest sound. The quiet enhances the normal sounds one never hears. Branches rubbing the house, the furnace kicking on, the normal creaking of an old house, all of these create a symphony of unsettling noise. I pour another drink. Banging on the front door jars me awake. My head shoots up while my arms sweep across the desk, sending an empty bottle and glass crashing to the floor. My right hand finds the gun. I clutch it with an unsteady grip. Night has transitioned to the beginnings of dawn. The sound at the front door increases in volume and intensity. I stumble out of the office and stagger away, fleeing the perceived threat. Treading down the dimly lit hall, a figure appears, walking toward me. It is an amalgamation of all the missing body parts Aaron Morton refused to return. The face glares at me. The unblinking eyes are Morton's. I scream, pointing the pistol at the ghastly figure. I pull the trigger until it locks open. Darkness engulfs me. Voices raise me from the abyss. My eyes open to the sight of a nurse bending over me. "Welcome back, Jay. I thought we had lost you." The nurse's name is Marilyn. She is a friend. Several years prior, I won a large settlement for her after her husband was killed by a drunk driver. Occasionally, we see each other socially. Where am I? Drake County Hospital. When? Early this morning. Seems you had a bit too much to drink last night. Her head nods toward the other side of the bed. He brought you in. I turn my head. A man is standing next to the bed. I look over at him. Sheriff Martin Burton stands with his arms folded. Jay, what the hell were you doing last night? Taking a deep breath, I stop and collect my thoughts. I guess I fell asleep at my desk. I heard noises at the front door this morning and it startled me. You shot your hall mirror to smithereens. Guess we scared you, huh? You might say that. I came by to tell you the Chicago PD received a posthumous letter from Morton yesterday. The letter gave them the location of all the missing body parts. My reaction to his words must seem strange to the sheriff. I close my eyes and say, just as he wrote in his letter, he has made amends and settled old scores. The bodies are now whole.
My name is Travis Burke, and you can believe me if you want to. I saw my first shadow person when I was 10 years old. It terrified me then, and it terrifies me now. It started one night at bedtime. I was lying in the dark, trying to ignore the battle sounds bleeding through the flimsy wall. The tension between my mom and George, her newest louse of a husband, was stifling. Their arguments didn't care if it was a school night or not, so I learned to focus on the quiet things. The swish of tree limbs outside my window, the occasional rain on the rooftop, the soft glow of my Avengers wall clock, and the peaceful ticking of its second hand. As I was nodding off, something moved across the clock. The form was so black that it stood out from the darkness itself. It drifted through the shadows like a murky mist. I lay there, frozen and breathless, watching, listening. The vein in my temple pulsed with every heartbeat. I braced for an icy touch or the hissing of my name. Easing my arm from beneath the covers, I turned on the Captain America lamp on my nightstand. There was no lunging monster, no ghoul grasping. There was simply no one there. I checked the usual hiding places where all monsters dwell, under the bed, inside the closet. Still, I shivered. At age 10, ghosts and monsters were still a frightening possibility to me. I lay in bed with the lamp on until I couldn't stay awake. After a few hours of fitful sleep, the sun had risen when I woke up. The first dull moments of wakefulness temporarily erased the previous night's episode from my mind, but the lamp was still on, and I remembered why. Getting dressed that morning, I debated whether I should tell Mom about the dark object. She'd probably chalk it up to a bad dream and move on. Then there was the other part of the decision. I didn't want to add weight to the heavy emotional bundle she was already lugging around. The poor woman was working 2 part-time jobs and bowing before a 3-pack-a-day habit. She was depressed and angry, and she didn't need any more problems. And besides, we already had a demon to deal with. So I kept it to myself. The next few nights were uneventful. Could have been the lights I kept on as a precaution, but I was starting not to think so. Maybe there'd been no specter in the first place. It was conceivable that it had all been a trick of my tired eyes. I was glad that I hadn't told Mom. I felt a little embarrassed about the whole thing. I turned off the lights and closed my eyes. Curled up on my side, I listened to the clock's ticking, my breath keeping time with the steady beats. Soon, I felt the gentle tug of sleep. Noises came from inside my closet. Wire hangers tinkled, shoes tapped. My stomach was tight and my jaw trembled. The doorknob creaked as it turned. Slowly, the door dragged over the carpet. I sat up and looked at the closet. A chill ran through me like an electrical current as I watched 4 inky fingers curl out and grab hold of the outside of the door. Whatever was on the other side shot out and landed on my ceiling like a fly. It was directly over me. It resembled an adult human shadow. Suddenly, 2 white, beastly eyes sprang open and glared down at me. Horror seized me, constricting my lungs and preventing me from screaming. Though terrified, I couldn't look away from the creature. Soundlessly, it dropped from the ceiling and locked me in a cold embrace. A rush of blackness filled my head, and then I can't remember. The following morning, I was startled awake when Mom yelled at me to get ready for school. I'd been so worked up at bedtime that I'd forgotten to set my alarm clock. The first thing I noticed was that my pajamas were soaked in sweat. Then, the hazy memory of the creature slithered through my mind, its image sharpening with every wriggle. I searched the room for something out of place, my ceiling in particular. There was no sign that anything had been there, and I couldn't remember what had happened after I'd blacked out. It was like trying to make sense of a past dream. But there was something different about me. Something was off. I went through the morning routine like a robot. Somehow, I faked my way through the day and the couple of weeks that followed. Sleep was hard to come by, but when I was able to, it was with the ceiling light, my superhero lamp, and my old Scooby-Doo nightlight on. Soon, it was early January, and Old Man Winter started throwing his weight around. Our small, drafty house was locked up tight to keep out the cold, so it always reeked of alcohol and nicotine. If that wasn't bad enough, the winter months brought out the worst in George and Mom. They were like two feral animals cooped up in a tiny cage. By now, Mom probably realized that marrying George had been a mistake. Some women marry men hoping to change them, but George did not subscribe to this plan. For one thing, he liked to drink, and when he did, he darn well didn't want to be bothered. Sometimes all it took to set him off was leaving my toys out. I can still feel his belt on my back. I recall times when Mom and I would have to run to the bathroom and lock the door during one of his drunken outbursts. We'd cower in the bathtub until he gave up and went to pass out in the living room. One evening after dinner, I was on my bed doing homework. The overhead light gave me a headache, so I turned it off and used the lamp. As I perused my history book, it felt like someone was staring at me. I jerked my head up. No one was there. I waited for a bit before returning to my textbook. A few minutes later, I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. And when I turned to it, I began trembling. In place of the usual shadows of my room, the figures of a man and woman were on my bedroom wall. They stood facing each other, their mouths moving. A few seconds later, the man slapped the woman. When she tried to fight back, the slaps became punches. Then the man choked her until she went limp. He maintained his grip on her for a while longer. When he finally let go, the woman's body dropped in a heap at his feet. Gradually, the figures morphed into the original shadows of my bed, my dresser, and me. My body was like a slab of ice. Was I hallucinating? Crazy? I was afraid I'd crossed over to a foreign, forbidden place from which I'd never return. An overwhelming wave of distress washed over me. Whom could I turn to? Not Mom, certainly not George. There was no one to save me. I was helpless and alone in a realm of dark thoughts, scared and isolated. But then, I'd always felt that way. I was an odd duck with few friends A loser always on the outside looking in at kids who had a chance at something better. As I settled down and thought more about it, my fear gave way to curiosity. What were those shadows? Why hadn't they hurt me? And why were they communicating with me? The answer came the next day. There were police cars and an ambulance in front of my house. From the sidewalk, I could see George sitting in the back of one of the cruisers. Flashing blue lights cast a pulsating glow on his pale, sweaty face. His empty eyes stared forward into nowhere. Our neighbor, Annie Miller, rushed up beside me and threw her arms around me as I stumbled toward my house. She was crying. "Oh, sweetie," she said. "You don't want to go there. Just wait here with Annie for a bit." Standing there next to Mrs. Miller, I watched the scene unfold with everyone else on the block. After a while, 2 men in uniforms eased a stretcher through the front door. On top was a bulging black bag. My heart began pounding to the point of bursting. I started sobbing. No one needed to tell me who was in that bag. I knew it was my mother. George had killed her. It had all taken place on my bedroom wall. Anguish pierced my soul like a white-hot blade. The most important person in my life was gone. Memories of Mom crowded my mind. The way she gushed over every crappy picture I drew in kindergarten, pawning her jewelry so she could give me a decent Christmas. She was my world. Now, that world had ended. What was going to happen to me? Aunt Gertie and Uncle Harry didn't hesitate to take me in after Mom's murder. Aunt Gertie was Mom's older sister by 2 years. She and Uncle Harry had always done their best to help us out. There was a haven for us whenever we fled from George. They had no children of their own and had always treated me as if I were theirs. Their unconditional love and kindness relieved some of the torment. The emotions that pummeled me during that time left a permanent stain on my spirit. First, I missed my mother. Second, I felt like a stupid coward for seeing the shadow people as scary monsters instead of what they were. Harbingers. I could have saved my mom and warned her, but I didn't understand. Last, there was my overwhelming urge to kill that animal, George. Rage devoured me. Forgiveness, mercy, and empathy evaporated like dew under the sun. Over the next several weeks, I was subjected to police questioning, court testimony, and grief counseling. I was exhausted. Late one evening, I was lying in my new bed with the lamp on, unable to turn off my brain. Something stirred on one wall. After a long break, they were back. I was hesitant to look, but what if it was another message? My first thought was, oh God, not Aunt Gertie and Uncle Harry. There was a lone shadow facing sideways. I could tell that it was George's silhouette by its size and shape. Standing behind bars, he took off his shirt and began tying one end to the top grid of one of the bars. The other he wrapped around his neck. He walked forward a few steps and then fell backward. And, just as before, once the shadows completed the scene, my wall went blank again. I probably should have been petrified. Instead, I enjoyed a sublime sense of satisfaction and a peace I hadn't known since before George invaded our lives. I turned off the light and slept like a baby. The following day, we got the news of George's suicide. Uncle Harry said, "That's too bad. Pass the pancakes?" I was in awe of the shadows and their strange abilities, grateful for the vengeance they'd exacted. It was as if they were mine and I was theirs, forever joined in thought and deed. I decided that I'd keep their existence and their specific purpose my special secret. The recent performance of the terror troupe filled me with questions. Why had they chosen me? Had they sensed my pain, my anger, my fear? I'd wanted George to die, and he had. I wondered about the first shadow after it pulled me into itself. Had the experience given me special power? I needed some answers, but I knew I'd have to go to a dark place to find them. In the end, it wasn't that difficult. All I needed was a lab rat. For that, I chose Adam Wentz, the terror of Westland Elementary. Because he'd been kept behind, twice, Adam was bigger and older than the rest of us. He was meaner, too. The kids he slapped, shoved, and threatened were legion. Like me, he came from a broken home, the difference being that it had never occurred to me to blame others. Who knows what it was about me that attracted his hatred? I was small for my age, nerdy, and painfully shy, so he probably found me an easy target. Once, during recess, he punched me in my stomach so hard that I threw up. Of course, there were no teachers around. The only thing worse than the physical abuse was the delight he took in humiliating me. He'd called me Baby Boy, a nickname that caught on much too quickly. It was as if the other kids had figured that the best way to escape his notice was to join in. I hated going to school. I dreaded it. It always left me feeling small and weak and worthless. After another awful day at school, I returned home and ran straight to my room. Most times, I went there to cry and think of harming myself. However, that day was different. That day offered possibilities, answers. Laying on my bed, I closed my eyes and filled my thoughts with every cruel thing Adam had ever done to me. I dreamed about him. After a while, the effort tired me, and I slipped away into an easy sleep. I don't recall how long I was out, but the room began to darken when I woke up, and Aunt Gertie called me down for supper. After devouring another of her amazing Swiss chicken casseroles, I watched TV until she and Uncle Harry told me to get ready for bed. When I got to my room, I put on my pajamas, climbed into bed, and waited. I was eager to see what kind of payback my defenders would unleash on Adam. God, how he deserved it. My arm was still sore from the previous day when he'd twisted it until I yelled, "I'm a baby boy!" I stared at my wall for a long time. When the shadows didn't appear, I figured the experiment had failed. I was disappointed. Who was I kidding? There were no special powers, certainly not for me. I reached over to turn off the light. An image of something reclining in a bathtub materialized on the wall. It was hard to identify, but it could only be Adam. There was a small, rectangular object at the foot of the tub. Adam's feet were tapping, and his head was bobbing. His foot nudged the object, and it tumbled into the water. His shadow flopped around for a while, then stopped and slumped until his head disappeared. The moving shadows melted into familiar ones. I was dumbfounded. Could it be true? Did I have the ability to mete out retribution? Did this mean that I would no longer be the victim, but the victor? Relief settled over me, and just as I'd done after George's execution, I turned off the lamp and went straight to sleep, smiling. The news of Adam's death passed through school the next day. Chatty teachers whispered innuendos about his dysfunctional family. An indifferent janitor removed Adam's personal effects from his locker. None of the students seemed upset. Some were likely relieved. As for me, I was exhilarated. 10 years old, and I had the power over life and death. It was as though I'd become a superhero. There was a new sheriff in town, and he was looking for justice. Over the next several years, I worked my magic on a few other people. A cheating girlfriend, decapitation, and another bully, broken neck. And the weird neighbor who hung around the playground, struck by a car. I was so drunk on power I was staggering. I was also getting sloppy. One day, my college roommate, Paul, asked, "Say, Travis, doesn't it creep you out that you knew all those people who died?" Poor Paul. Rottweiler attack. I regretted that one. Paul was my friend, and I'd offered him up to the shadows for nothing other than convenience. Seeing Paul's shattered family at his funeral caused a seismic shift. It brought back all the brokenness I'd gone through after a selfish thug had taken away my heart and soul. I was ashamed, convicted. It was time to stop. I'd taken more than my pound of flesh. I needed to move on before becoming a monster far worse than those I'd encountered growing up. The problem was that there were still other monsters roving around. Not long after I graduated, I began working as an administrative assistant for a major banking firm, which meant being nothing more than a glorified gopher. At the time, I was the assistant to Mr. Marcus T. Connor, an up-and-coming financial wizard and first-rate jerk. Marcus treated me like a stupid animal in constant need of a good swift kick. He even had a nickname for me, Monkey. It wasn't quite as bad as Baby Boy, but it hurt. Marcus took great delight in humiliating me in front of others. Sort of a, hey, look what I can do power trip. Most of my coworkers felt bad for me, but just like those cowardly kids in grade school, some of them ragged me about it. It was common to find a banana lying on my desk. Marcus's bullying destroyed what little was left of my self-esteem. My stomach constantly churned with nerves. And the nightmares? Horrific. Finally, I pulled together enough courage to do something about it. But like so many of my plans, all my efforts to transfer to other departments failed. When Marcus caught wind of it, he waged a personal terror campaign against me, making me clean up the coffee he'd accidentally spilled on his office's floor, or having me come in on weekends to change out copier ink. Life was miserable, again. One day, he summoned me to his office and chewed me out for not having filed a report on time, which I had. He swore at me and intimidated me just like Adam and George had done all those years ago. I felt their fists all over my body. Their terrible words squirmed through my brain like earwigs. A wave of old, familiar anxiety rose inside me like bile. My hands shook. My mouth was an arid pit. Never having been one for physical confrontation, I broke eye contact. My eye's vision moved about, to the left, to his right. On top of a credenza in the corner of the office were some photos of Marcus and his family on vacation. A beach, a ski lodge, a cruise ship. But what caught my eye was the young boy in the pictures. He had such a sweet, happy smile. They all did. As Marcus raged on, I smiled a bit myself. I rambled around my apartment that night, convincing myself that I was no longer a killer. Marcus was a despicable person, but he had a family who loved him. He had a child, for pity's sake. I wanted to surrender my pride to those feelings, but I'd come too far to go back to being less than nothing. I threw back several Jack and Cokes. The more I drank, the weaker my conscience became. Who did that creep think he was to screw with me? I controlled a shadow army, the agents of my wrath. I paced back and forth like a panther in a cage. Drunk and exhausted, I collapsed on the couch and fell asleep. The following morning, the alarm on my cell phone roused me. I rolled off the couch, crawled to the bathroom, managed a cold shower, and got dressed. I was so hungover that I barely made it to work. When I arrived, I found a yellow post-it that Marcus had attached to my PC monitor. "Get yourself in my office 5 minutes ago." After a couple of slow, deep breaths, I walked over to his office and rapped on the door. "Come in!" he yelled. He was sitting on the front edge of his desk, glaring at me. "Know why you're here?" When I told him I didn't, he pounded his fist on the desk hard enough to make me jump. As it turned out, he was furious that I hadn't come in early enough to pick up his dry cleaning. He'd had an important meeting to attend and wanted to wear his power suit. The louder he got, the sicker I felt. I looked at the pictures of his son, his charmed, grinning son. His image haunted me. Once again, I was staring at another of the blessed few who got to enjoy a better life than I'd had or would ever have. Call it hopelessness or self-pity, but at that moment I felt like a non-person, a wasted opportunity to become someone valuable and respectable. After all this time, I was still a loser, on the outside looking in, always destined to be a doormat. My face grew hot as cruel memories assaulted my mind. "Shut up or I'll kill you and your stupid mother." "Look, it's baby boy." "Clean up that coffee before it stains my carpet, monkey." I grabbed Marcus by his lapels, spun him around, and threw him over his desk. Adrenaline roared through my veins. I gritted my teeth so hard I thought they'd shatter. Then, for the first time in my life, I became the angry one who did the shoving. My coworker, Albert, working outside of Marcus's office, rushed in to see what was going on. Marcus clambered to his feet. "This idiot just tried to kill me! Call security!" I pushed past Albert and ran. I sat at home, waiting for my cell phone to ring, but neither Marcus, his lawyer, nor the police called. I thought about contacting some friends at the office and asking for intel. Bad idea? I didn't know. My nerves were making me squirrely and paranoid. I lay down on the couch and threw back more Jack and Coke to keep it together. By early evening, I was kicked back and watching trash TV. I'd become quite relaxed, filthy drunk. My mouth tasted stale. I squinted at the TV, trying to sharpen the images that flitted about like blurry moths. Then, the wall behind the TV became a canvas of shifting light. I thought I was seeing things. I wasn't. The figures were two men. Judging by the animated body language, one of them was upset. It didn't take long to recognize the shadows of Marcus and me. I looked on as they recreated the fight scene from earlier that day. Once it ended, the shadows returned to normal. Watching my shadow take on a life of its own that way gave me a cold chill. It was like looking at my ghost. I hadn't felt this kind of unease for quite some time. Why had they shown me the reenactment? It was all past now. As if someone were reading my thoughts, my cell phone rang. It was Albert, the referee from the office SmackDown. "My God, Travis, I can't believe you're home," he said. "I thought they'd have you downtown for questioning by now." It was hard to focus as I was 2 sheets to the wind. "What are you saying, Albert?" My head was beginning to throb. I wanted to pass out. I wish that I had. "It's Marcus," he said. "He's dead. They think he might have hit his head harder than anyone realized when you two were going at it. Like maybe his brain swelled up or something. He's dead, and they think it's a direct result of you assaulting him." That's all I could stand to hear. I hung up. I didn't make a move or think a thought for the longest time. When the police arrived and started pounding on my door, I couldn't get up to open it. Eventually, Mr. Inez, the building super, had to let the 2 detectives inside. Detectives Andrews and Marsh had likely dealt with more cooperative suspects than me. I was like a mannequin throughout the interrogation, arraignment, and trial. I mentioned a little something about supernatural beings to my sad excuse for a lawyer, but he dismissed it. It didn't help that my co-workers testified that I'd been miserable working for Marcus, that I despised him. But the worst part was watching Marcus's family in the gallery. His wife was glassy-eyed and expressionless, as if she had no more tears, no more heart. And his son, my God, that poor little boy. He looked like he'd been broken into a million tiny shards. I knew that look. I had the same one when they carried my mother away. I found no joy in Marcus's death. I failed to understand why the shadows hadn't alerted me to their violent prediction and the role I'd play in its execution. Eventually, it came to me. How arrogant of me to think I was the only one deserving of strength and mercy. I wonder if the kid was as scared as I was when I first witnessed the shadows. I'm sure he had no idea how to process the dreadful performance. By the time he could, it was already too late. I understand how he felt when he learned that I was the one who'd robbed him of his father. I know his guilt, his rage. Everything wrapped up just a few weeks ago. Marcus's death was a horrible accident, but the justice system doesn't always go out of its way to split hairs about homicide. I'm agonizing over how I'm supposed to get through the next 5 years in this cramped metal cage until I'm eligible for parole. As for the shadow figures, I'm awaiting a visit from them any time now. My first experience showed me how they deal with killers. A child will dream about me. Then, one evening, he'll detect movement on a wall. The dark ones will perform a scene featuring a lone figure in a cell. Perhaps it'll stab itself in its dark throat with a handmade shiv, or fashion a noose from prison clothing. I wonder if I'll have a say in my suicide, or if I'll be helpless in bringing about my death sentence. It's hard to fall asleep here. There's no glowing Avengers clock hanging on these filthy walls. No second hand lulling me to sleep, carrying me far away from the barren terrain of my life. The only sounds in this human zoo are snores and whispers. When I plead with the angels for sleep on nights like this, I often look back to when I'd first searched for a monster under my bed and a ghost in my closet, but discovered the shadow instead. It terrified me then, and it terrifies me now. When my final scene concludes, I fear they will absorb my shadow, my soul, and count me among their own. Who knows? Maybe I'll be coming to a wall near you. My name is Travis Burke, and you can believe me if you want to. But if you do, you might want to turn on the lights. It's starting to get dark.
Alex was bored of flipping burgers. He wanted to earn some serious pay like his friend Devin, who worked at the Heavenly View Funeral Parlor. On his way to history class, he bumped into his pal in the hall. "Hey, I heard Matt quit on Mr. Malone." "Yeah, I'm surprised he lasted a week." "I'm going to apply for the position," Alex said. He punched Devin in the arm. "Put in a good word for me, okay?" "You got it," he said. "It'll be great to have someone at the parlor to talk with who actually has a pulse." For the rest of the day, Alex couldn't stop thinking about all the cash that he'd earn. If Malone hired him, he'd be able to save enough money to backpack through Europe in the summer. After school, he threw his dirty gym clothes into his car and drove over to the old Victorian-style building. "I'm running behind schedule." Mr. Malone handed him a job application, then gestured for Alex to follow him along a hallway toward the back of the building. Alex kept up with the mortician, trailing behind into a sterile, hospital-like room. Mr. Malone hunched over a steel sink. He scrubbed his hands, but his fingers still looked yellowed. "Chemical exposure," he said, drying his hands with a couple of paper towels. He slipped into his white coat. "So Devin tells me you're a hard worker." "Yes, sir." Malone walked over to a steel table. He lifted the sheet off a body and looked at Alex as though waiting for a reaction. Alex swallowed hard. The guy on the gurney had a jagged gash between his eyes. "Chainsaw accident," the mortician said. "Now it's my job to make Mr. Andrews look as good as he did before the accident. He's going to need a lot of makeup." He glanced up at Alex again. "Do you need a chair?" "No." Alex took a deep breath to steady his nerves. "It's just the first time I've ever seen a corpse. But I'm all right." "Job pays $12 an hour." Malone stuffed cotton balls into the dead man's hollow cheeks, shaping them to look full and natural. "You'll be expected to work graveyard shift every other weekend. Double pay for holidays and a raise every 6 months." He looked up from the cadaver. "If you think you can handle it, fill out the app, and you can start tomorrow after school." "I can handle it, sir." "Good. Devin will show you the ropes." "Thank you, sir." "There." Malone stepped back and admired his work. "Mr. Andrews looks much better already, doesn't he?" Yeah, he looks pretty good. For a dead guy, that is." As Alex backed out of the room, he bumped into a gurney with another body laying on it. "Sorry," he said to the corpse. "See you tomorrow, young man," Malone said. "Oh, and do me a favor. Don't park your car in the upper lot behind the building. It's reserved for our guests. Oh, sure. Alex hurried to his red Honda parked at the curb. He could hardly wait to quit his job at the Purple Onion. He fired up the engine and headed toward the fast food restaurant. Goodbye, dead-end job. The next day, when the final school bell rang, Alex hustled through the halls and zigzagged through the student parking lot. He jumped into his Honda, fired it up, and smiled as he hit green lights all the way to his new job. As a florist van pulled away from the curb in front of the Heavenly View funeral parlor, he slid into the parking space. Alex nodded a hello to the gardener. The landscaper smiled as he trimmed the hedges lining the brick walkway that led to the funeral parlor. Alex's thoughts turned to Mr. Andrews and the gruesome gash between his eyes. Wiping his sweaty palms in his jeans, he sucked in a deep breath and ran up the steps to the door. Devon met him in the foyer. "Punctual, I'm impressed." He turned and headed up the red carpeted staircase. "Come on, I'll give you the grand tour." Alex followed him up the sweeping steps. He looked around. "This place is something else," he said in a quiet voice. Devon laughed. "Rule number 1. You don't have to whisper around here. Everybody's dead, remember?" "Oh, yeah, right." Alex slid his hand along the polished banister, walking past old photographs in dark mahogany frames. He paused and studied one of the black and white pictures. "Is this the funeral parlor?" "Yeah, the historic building is one of the oldest in town." He pointed to the photograph. "See the family having lemonade on the porch? They used to live here." It's hard to imagine anyone ever living here before. Devon led up the steps. Well, when the last one kicked the bucket, the house was left to Malone's grandfather, the town mortician. It's been in Malone's family ever since. At the top of the stairs, Alex peered over the wood rail at the sitting room with fancy burgundy velvet chairs, floral couches, ferns in large flower pots, and crystal vases filled with the stalks of fresh white lilies. Devon opened the first door to his left. "We have 3 viewing rooms. This is one of them." His friend's voice echoed in the empty chamber. On the ceiling was a painted mural with 3 cherubs playing golden harps. You'll see angel murals throughout the building. Devon gently closed the door and kept moving along the hall. "Our main job is to prepare each room for the relatives who come by to visit their loved one." Devon swung the middle door open, and Alex poked his head inside. A great coffin stood in front of rows of empty chairs. Alex recognized Mr. Andrews in the open casket. He lay dressed in a blue business suit, hands folded peacefully. Mr. Malone did a good job covering up the Frankenstein gash. At the end of the hall, Alex followed his friend into the 3rd chamber. It was cold, hollow, and empty. Devon crossed to the floor-length drapes. "When you close up the place at night, make sure the doors behind the curtains in all 3 rooms are locked." He pulled back one of the off-white drapes, revealing a set of double doors. "If you don't, Malone will fire your butt and you'll be flipping burgers again." "What's behind them?" Devon pushed the doors open. "This is our private parking lot. It's where the company hearse, the Deathmobile, picks up our clients and takes them for their last ride to the cemetery. It's also easier to load the hearse from here than to risk dropping a casket down the stairs. Not good for business, you know." "Yeah, that makes sense." "Also," Devon shut the doors, "lately we've had a problem with the bereft family members hiding out in the building so they can sit with their loved one overnight. Make sure you lock the doors. Got it?" Alex nodded. Yeah, I got it." A skittering spider feeling ran up his spine. Alex shook it off as he followed Devon back to the main floor. "Did Malone explain the graveyard shift?" "Well, not in detail." "Simple." Devon led him down another flight of stairs. "One of us stays every other Friday through Sunday night. It's not too bad. Just bring plenty of homework so you don't get bored stiff, and some clean underwear." Alex chuckled. Devin paused at the bottom step and faced Alex. "You can sneak in a couple of friends to keep you company, too. Just make sure Malone doesn't catch you." Alex followed him into a large room with a couch, TV, and a table for 4 chairs. "So I've got to stay overnight. Alone? You're not getting cold feet, are you?" "Nah, I'm cool." Alex shrugged his shoulder. "Dead people don't scare me." "Good." Devin plopped on the brown leather couch and propped his feet on the coffee table. "This is the employee lounge, also known as the basement," he said. "Hey, don't look so worried. The bodies buried beneath the floorboards have already been dug up." "You're joking, right?" "Lighten up, will you? If you're going to work here, you've got to have a warped sense of humor." Alex looked at the far corner. "What's that?" Devin crossed the room and pulled the handle. "Malone has this fridge custom built to look like Dracula's coffin. Pretty cool, isn't it?" He reached inside. "Want a cold one?" Devin tossed him a frosty can of soda. "Thanks." Alex dropped onto a stool in the shape of a headstone. He popped open the can. "Are you sure you're all right? You're not going to flake like Matt, are you?" Devin put his mouth to the lip of his cold drink and took a sip. "Because if you are, you can quit just right now and not waste my time. This job's not for chickens. I told you I'm not scared. I just want this job." Over the following weeks, Alex took pride in making sure the viewing rooms shined to Malone's strict specifications. Just because people have expired doesn't mean they don't deserve excellent customer service. Mr. Malone had stated in an employee meeting. Every work shift, Alex dragged the vacuum around the entire upstairs. He dusted the furniture, polished the stair railing, wiped the mirrors, and made sure all incoming floral arrangements were personally delivered to the proper viewing rooms. He got so used to working with the dead that he even started talking to them, unloading his personal problems. Unlike the living, the dearly departed were good at keeping his secrets. Alex liked his job. The stiffs never complained like the picky customers at the Purple Onion, and those extra zeros on his paychecks were nice too. It was rolling in the green, but now that he had a hefty bank account, his girlfriend had dumped him. She had said she refused to date a guy who worked around dead people. It was Alex's turn to work the weekend shift again. On Friday night, after closing up shop, he chilled in the employees' lounge. It had been raining heavily all day. Lightning crackled and the power flicked off and back on again. Thunder rumbled and rattled the building. "Hope this storm doesn't keep the guys from stopping by tonight." Alex was alone in the mortuary. The only other person at the funeral parlor was a girl around his age, but she didn't have a heartbeat, so technically she didn't count. Her name was Brittany. Devin informed him that she'd gone to their school's rival, Lincoln High. Brittany's memorial service was scheduled for Saturday. Earlier, Alex arranged the dozens of bouquets and floral sprays that had arrived at the parlor for the girl. Throughout the day, in one-sided conversations with Brittany, he told her about the breakup with his girlfriend. "I really miss her." He confided how none of the other girls at school wanted to go out with him either. She sighed as they straightened the rows of chairs for the service. "After tomorrow, I won't even have you to talk with anymore." Alex set out boxes of tissues. Before leaving the room, he looked back at the pretty girl. "Thanks for listening. See you around, Brett." After the parlor closed for the day, he dropped by Brittany's room again. She looked so peaceful, with a hint of a smile, and her long blonde hair tucked behind her shoulders. Alex leaned in. "Why'd you have to die?" he said. "We could have been friends, hung out together." Then Alex started to laugh. "What am I saying? A chick like you with me? Never." A hard knock came from behind the curtain, making Alex jump. The guys, their hair. He reached behind the drapes and opened the door. Drenched from the rain, his friends, Eddie and Mike, stepped inside. "We're here to liven up the party," Mike said, carrying a couple of soggy pizza boxes. Eddie held up 2 liters of soda. "Did you invite some girls?" Mike wandered over to Brittany's coffin. "Hey, drop dead gorgeous. I knew you were dying to meet me, but I didn't expect you to fall for me so hard." "Leave her alone." Alex rushed over and lowered the lid. "Come on, let's go play some cards." He ushered his friends downstairs and toward the employee lounge. For hours they played poker and stuffed their faces with pizza. Alex glanced at the clock. "Almost midnight, guys." He rubber-banded the deck of spades, hearts, diamonds, and clubs. "You've got to go. Can't risk Malone finding you here." "All right, we can take a hint." Eddie folded and stuffed a cold slice of pizza in his mouth, then grabbed his jacket from the back of the chair. Alex guided the guys to the main door and through the dimly lit sitting area. Flashes of lightning lit up the large room. Rain battered the tall and narrow windows. "Man, you could never pay me enough to work here." Mike said, "Have you seen any, ghosts?" Eddie tapped Alex's shoulder from behind and made him jump. "Do you think I'd work here if I had?" Alex escorted his pals up the sweeping steps and toward the room at the far end of the hall. Thunder growled. Mike and Eddie stuck close to Alex as they walked past the girl's closed coffin. Mike pulled back the drapes and pushed open one of the doors. A strong, bone-chilling wind blew through the room, knocking over floral arrangements. "Great," Alex said. "Hurry up, you guys. I gotta clean up this mess." He pushed his friends into the storm. "See you at school, okay?" He turned the lock and stood at the viewing room door. The car started and his pals were gone. Alex ran upstairs and grabbed the mop, then picked up the scattered flowers and wiped up the puddles in the room. "That's better." He headed back to the lounge and tossed out the empty pizza boxes. "I better make my last rounds." In the sitting area, Alex scanned the dark and quiet building, filled with jagged shadows. In the daytime, he hardly noticed the creaky floor, but the unrelenting thunderstorm tonight made him feel a little jumpy. Using his mental checklist for his rounds, he stuck his head into Malone's office first. Clear. Next, he leaned into the embalming room. It was a slow night. Empty. Chapel. Not a soul. Bathrooms. Alex grabbed the can of air freshener and sprayed the men's restroom. Better. He patrolled the upstairs hall, lit by amber lights hanging along the length of the ceiling. He checked the 3 viewing rooms, including the one at the far end of the hall. One cute dead girl. Alex let out a heavy sigh. The 3 sets of double doors leading to the back parking lot were secured. The place was wrapped up tighter than a pharaoh's tomb. Alex dimmed the lights in the sitting room and headed back downstairs to the lounge. He flipped the TV remote to Comedy Sketch Live and stretched out his long legs on the couch. A few times he caught himself dozing off. He grabbed a cola, hoping the caffeine would help keep him awake. Then Alex dropped back onto the sofa cushions. He pulled out his cell phone and played a few games. It wasn't long before the caffeine wore off and his mind drifted. Bet Brittany had a lot of boyfriends. Thunder exploded. Alex jumped. The basement lamp flickered. Pop! The bulb, hanging above the large table, blinked out, and the room fell dark. Great! Using the light from his cell phone, he found the big utility flashlight under the sink and clicked it on. The bright beam shot across the room. Hope there's extra bulbs around here. Alex rummaged through the cupboards and came up empty-handed. At least he still had the glow of the television screen, he thought. He'd just gotten comfortable on the couch again when the TV crackled and the screen zapped out. Alex quickly located the fuse box and flipped each switch. Nothing. He hated thunderstorms for this exact reason. Power outages. The temperature in the room dropped. Alex zipped a sweatshirt to his chin, then made his way back to the sofa where he lay in the dark, listening to the rain beat against the building. The steady drum made him drowsy. He fought to stay awake, but he felt himself slipping into sleep. Suddenly, he was jerked awake by a noise. Ooh! Alex sat up and listened. His shoulders relaxed when he realized it was the wind. It sure is howling tonight. Chilled, he curled up and shut his eyes again. Ooh! Why'd I have to die? A voice sobbed. That's not the wind. Alex rolled off the cushions and thudded to the hardwood floor. Someone's in the building, but that's impossible. I checked every inch of this place. Grabbing the flashlight, he stumbled up the basement steps. In the foyer, he flipped the light switch on. On, off, on, off. Power's still out. Alex crept across the darkened sitting room. He shined the beam up the staircase. Why'd I have to die? The cry sounded like it was coming from the room at the end of the hall. It's probably one of Brittany's grieving relatives or friends. Alex dreaded having to ask them to leave. He especially felt bad about tossing them out into the storm. But what other choice did he have? If he didn't, his butt would be toast. He took the steps 2 at a time and froze when the cries grew more intense. Why? Oh, why did I have to die? Alex gripped the flashlight tighter. Who's there? A whistle escaped from his lips as he called out. No answer. At the top of the stairs, he pointed the light down the shadowy corridor. What was that? He thought he caught a glimpse of a ghostly figure. No way. He rubbed his eyes as the wispy white fog floated across the hall and through the wall. I didn't see anything. My eyes are playing tricks. Thunder crashed. A blinding light slashed across the wallpaper. Alex edged along the hallway. He muttered under his breath, Keep it real, Alex, keep it real. At the end of the corridor, he wiped his sweaty palm on his jeans and inched open the door. He stuck the flashlight into the room and swept it from one side to the other. Anyone in here? A stream of light landed on the open casket in front of the window. Wait a second. I closed Brittany's coffin, didn't I? Whoomp, whoomp. The wind-blown drapes in front of the double doors heaved in and out. Alex was certain he locked the doors, too. Someone broke in. I need to call the cops. Then his friends crept into his mind. Mike? Alex edged closer to the billowing curtains. Eddie, is that you? It'd be just like them to pull a stupid prank like this. As Alex pulled back the drapes, he became tangled in the folds of the fabric blown by the gusts of wind. It broke free and poked his head out into the open door and into the slanting rain. This isn't funny, you guys. He darted out to the middle of the empty parking lot, his sweatshirt soaked and sticking to his skin. Joke's over. No response. Mike? Eddie? He waited a minute for his friends to leap out of the shadows. All right, you're really spooking me. Bam! Alex spun around. The viewing room door had blown shut. He sprinted toward the building and yanked the handle. He pulled harder. The doors didn't budge. Alex ran back to the middle of the parking lot. That's it, he yelled. I'm fed up with you clowns. The window. Maybe it's unlocked. He pushed against the waist-high shrubs. Through white sheer curtains, he could see Brittany lying in her coffin. I have to get back inside, now. He'd deal with the guys later. Alex jiggled the old window casing. It rattled, but didn't move. He thought of breaking the glass, but if it broke, Malone would deduct a new window from his paycheck. He stood in the pouring rain. Think, Alex, think. With the heel of his palm, he thumped along the edge of the window until it loosened and scraped upward. All right. He then pulled himself up and dangled his legs over the ledge inside, careful not to bump Brittany's coffin. Lightning lit up the room. He looked down into the casket. Empty. The coffin's empty. Where'd she go? Thunder exploded. Bone-chilling wind and rain whipped at his back. Icy cold fingers rested on the top of his hand. Ooh, why did I have to die? In short, jerking motions, Alex turned his head to his right. Another streak of lightning flickered. There, standing beside him, stood the pale girl. Please tell me, why did I have to die? She leaned forward, cocked her head, and stared at him with vacant eyes. Alex slipped and tumbled headfirst into the empty coffin. The coffin crashed to the floor, flowers toppled on top of him. Alex rolled out and scuttled backward toward the darkened room. Brittany glided after him, her arms stretching, reaching out to him. Tell me, why did I have to die? Alex jumped to his feet. In the dark, he scrambled through the hall and pounded down the steps, sliding across the rug to the foyer. He lunged for the door, his trembling fingers fumbling with the deadbolt. Come on! He glanced over his shoulder and gasped. Brittany was gone. Where'd she go? The deadbolt clicked, and Alex ripped open the door. Rain lashed at him as he flew straight into the battering storm and into Brittany's ghostly arms. Ah! Ooh, why did I have to die? Alex broke free from her stiff and awkward grasp. That's just it. You didn't have to die, Alex screamed. You took your own life. Pills. Mr. Malone said doctors pumped your stomach, but it was too late. Ooh. Brittany wailed as she floated back into the funeral parlor. Too late, she moaned. Feeling sorry for her, Alex stood in the doorway, watching the sad girl float through the foyer, up the sweeping staircase, and along the hallway toward the viewing room. Each light flickered as she floated past a row of amber globes. Then the downstairs lit up. Ooh. A sorrowful moan escaped from the room at the end of the hall upstairs. Too late for me, Alex, but not too late for you. Alex trembled, not knowing if he should go back inside or not. He sat in his car the rest of the night thinking about his girlfriend and how much he missed her company and the late-night talks they used to have. And he missed having her sitting next to him in his car on Saturday night dates. He also missed his old job. The pay may not be good, but at least the place is full of life. As soon as Malone arrived at the parlor, Alex quit. He then drove over to the Purple Onion to ask for his job back. His old boss rehired him and offered him a raise. Maybe flipping burgers isn't such a dead-end job after all. At least until I graduate from high school.
The horde was closing fast, their foul scent heavy on the night air. As they scrambled over parked cars and rained down destruction on the streets in their sadistic frolicking. Some were on all fours like beasts, or upright like men. Others flapped their wings so loudly, David couldn't keep his wits about them. They were chanting his old name now, begging him to join them, promising to feast on his blood such as it was if he refused them. Long black coattails flew in the wind, concealing a dozen lanky, grinning bodies. They were playing with him now, and he despised them for it. Some of these foul creatures he had hated for a millennium, with good reason. Others he had once called friend. All he could do was keep running. There was only one more block to go. The meeting point was just up ahead. He could see it now through the piss-yellow mist that clouded the damp streets. David thought he might actually have a chance to outrun them.
The huge door stood bright and open, ready to receive him as a few late stragglers wandered out and huddled under their umbrellas in the hot summer rain. David lurched into a last desperate sprint, expending the last of his strength as vicious gibbering laughter swallowed him. He screamed as the black talons ripped into his flesh and the hot, rank breath filled his lungs. The last thing David saw was the cold, wet pavement slamming into his ravaged face. Jael perched on the heavy branch of an ancient oak tree, waiting for his brother to appear. He stifled a sharp cry of rage and agony. The empty streets had become way too quiet. The horde had taken his brother. He knew because he could no longer hear David's footsteps splashing through the alley, no longer feel his presence. The smell of death and the acrid stench of joy and exultation as the horde ravaged David's flesh sickened him. But there was nothing he could do alone against so many. Despite the silence, Jael could sense them out there. He would mourn his brother later in the proper time-honored way. David would understand. The whole world would know of his loss, his pain, and his sorrow. And they too would understand. The horde started in again, making a lot of noise, trying to lure him out. They always made so damn much noise. They were vulgar and he loathed them. In the days to come, if the opportunity arose, he would butcher every last one of them and savor the bitter taste of their blood as he licked it from his fingers. Leaping from the sagging branch, Jael landed silently on the pavement. But they had heard him and were after him in an instant. Jael quickly closed the distance between himself and the large welcoming building up ahead. But they were as fast and agile as he remembered, and they weren't laughing now, not playing with him at all. Their vile threats and hideous promises roared in his ears. A hot wave of foul, rancid breath washed over him as he exited the alley and scrambled up the broad marble staircase. The razor-like claws grazing the back of his neck as they closed with him on the second stair. Their screams echoed in his brain as they watched him stumble over the top two steps and stagger through the open door where he collapsed in a pool of candlelight. Jael watched as they retreated down the stairs, snarling and growling in rage as they disappeared back into the darkened, rain-soaked alley. It was silent again, and he surrendered to the press of cold white marble against his hot, tear-stained face. 1. Father Lorenzo's powerful, slender body knelt before the altar in prayer, but his heart just wasn't in it. It hadn't really been in it for years, if it ever truly had been. He was alert to everything around him, ears strained, muscles tensed for the slightest shift in the air if anyone came too close. Even his nostrils flared, waiting for anything amiss from the usual sounds and smells of the church and its habitual denizens. It had to be like this. St. Anne's Parish suffered the same problems as the city that engulfed him, and the growing population of homeless and those barely hanging on who crowded the neighboring streets. They were the addicts, hustlers, hookers, and related personnel, feral kids, old people on $1 a day, and others who defied all imaginative description, and none of them were looking for salvation. Even the inner sanctum of St. Anne's was no protection from the ravages of hunger and despair. Intruders robbed the parish 5 times in the last year and mugged Father Lorenzo at knife point on the front steps twice. An explosion of angry voices at the back of the church brought Father Lorenzo to his feet. He raced down the center aisle as the dark figure of a man appeared in the doorway and then collapsed on the floor. He dashed to the man's side, cautiously examining the motionless body. He saw a thick knot of black-clad figures scrambling down the steps and then disappearing in a half a dozen directions into the dark streets. The priest turned back to the fallen man and shook his head. What had looked exactly like arching wings a moment before as the man stood in the doorway were now just the dark folds of his long black coat. The youthful face wore a twisted and inhuman grimace. So many kids came here looking for shelter or a hot meal. Most of them were out of their minds on one drug or a veritable cocktail of them. At best, Lorenzo thought cynically, all I can offer them is just another drug. 2. Lorenzo sat on the edge of the battered brown leather chair in his study and stared at his young visitor. The boy was wide awake now and stared back at him. Taking a deep breath, the priest stood up, straightened his robes, and moved a few steps closer toward his guest. Hello, hi, Lorenzo said for the third time in 5 minutes, forcing a smile and extending his hand. Welcome to St. Anne's. The young man stood as Lorenzo approached, more than a head taller than the wiry priest, and he wasn't smiling. Lorenzo instinctively took 2 steps back. The strange dark eyes bore into his own, and he felt exposed and vulnerable, almost naked down to his soul in that peculiar wide-eyed gaze. There was something in those eyes that chilled the blood in his veins, but he just couldn't look away. Hi, the boy said. In his early 20s, lean and well-built, with long blonde hair, he was dressed in the uniform du jour, faded jeans, a Rockman t-shirt, and badly worn boots. His hand shot out and gripped Lorenzo's, giving it a quick shake that shot a wave of electric energy up his arm. The priest instinctively yanked his hand away, but immediately regretted it in the awkward silence. I'm Father Lorenzo. Are you hungry? The priest stammered, his mind sliding in confusion. Sweat trickled down his back and every fiber of his being recoiled within him and chalked his breath in his chest, telling him, run. Run for your very life from this room. Yeah, sure, the kid replied. I can eat, we can talk, and then you can let me use your computer. 3. My computer? What do you need my computer for? Lorenzo asked as they returned to his study, cups of steaming coffee in hand. The air in the study was surreal, like a dream in a fog, or a black and white movie of the sort he never really liked, and he found it hard to keep his thoughts straight. You've got a nice setup here, the boy said, ignoring his question and draining his coffee, then setting the cup on the floor next to his feet. But you're not right for this priest gig, you know, he continued. Your heart's just not in it, he added with a grin, standing up and walking to the bookshelf. Excuse me? Lorenzo said, knocking over his own coffee cup and not even noticing. Not anymore, it's not, the youth continued, absently sweeping the tall bookshelves with his eyes. You saw me last night, didn't you? But your mind doesn't want to admit it. What do you mean? Lorenzo mumbled. What did you see? The kid asked casually while absently running a finger down a row of books and checking for dust. What it looked like was crazy. I thought I saw wings. Lorenzo barked and tried to choke out a laugh. But, yeah, crazy. Maybe I look like what your lot calls an angel? The young man began stiffly, his lip curling in disgust. How I despise that word, he added, staring at the fireplace. My God, Lorenzo cried out, jumping to his feet. Sit down, the boy commanded. I don't have a lot of time. Let me say my piece. Then we can take care of business, and I can be on my way. All right, but no time for that. Okay, there are a lot of very disgruntled folks among my kind. The so-called light in the dark. The boy spat out the words with a snarl of mirthless laughter. How do you people come up with this drivel anyway? No, forget it. I don't understand. You can't be serious, said Lorenzo, leaning forward in his chair. The boy stood deathly still, tall as a reed, and Lorenzo gasped and covered his face as the figure grew taller, impossibly tall before him, and the rustling of wings brushed his face as a dark shadow fell over the room. Just as quickly as the apparition had appeared, it was gone, and the boy was again seated in his chair. Look at you! The kid snorted with a wave of his hand as Lorenzo cowered against the wall. Father Lorenzo staggered to his chair and collapsed into the soft old leather that yielded to his body. There's a new wind blowing among us. Nice guys like me, and the other kind too. Not so nice guys, and others who don't even care about you wingless wonders. The boy began, shaking his head again in irritation. I see, Lorenzo said, nodding. No, you don't. But moving along. We're bloody sick of the old myths your lot has nailed on to us, and we're more interested in how things really are, the boy said, dropping into his chair. And how are things really? Lorenzo muttered. Change! The boy roared. The universe is alive. Things flower and reform themselves into unimaginable variations. Humanity has bound us for too long, and we are through. We're done with you. What are you saying? Lorenzo asked, trying to shake the confusion from his mind. Oh, come on. You're a priest. Who better than you knows all the hideous and hoary monsters of horn and claw and their sappy white-winged counterparts, always blonde for some reason, that populate your sermons? It was never like that outside the imaginations of a few old unimaginative storytellers. But then it all went viral. Have we? But certainly... No! Shouted the boy. I'm insane for believing I'm really having this conversation, the priest mumbled to himself, his eyes wide and searching. You say you're going away. Where? The hell away from here, the kid roared. I can tell you that much. We're headed for the hot zone. Hot zone? Lorenzo asked sharply, thrilling at the sound of the words. Yeah, the hot zone. Kind of a no man's land. A demilitarized zone where nobody's in charge, the boy said with a tilt of his head and a hint of a smile. Think of the possibilities. And what do you need my computer for? Asked Lorenzo hesitantly. The computer is the portal, the jump point to the hot zone. The internet? Lorenzo cried out excitedly. Not just the internet, my good priest. The Tor. The Tor? Yeah. Gateway to the deep dark web. The hot zone. 4. Father Lorenzo stared down at the laptop computer in his office, his visitor at his side and his stomach in knots. On the top of the machine, etched across its silver hull, was the image of an apple with a bite taken out of it. The irony of this image was not lost on either priest or visitor. Why a church? Lorenzo heard himself ask. Why come here if it has no meaning for you? I'd have preferred a library, but this place was closer, the boy barked with a snort. And besides, like us, you guys are always open for business. A library? Yeah. The people who originally built libraries worshipped wisdom and knowledge. They understood the universal formula of design and work it into their monuments, temples, and libraries. It's a formula that's reflected in the atoms and in the bodies of man and animals, trees and rocks, between thought and action, for all time and throughout the very cosmos itself. And the computer? What's the connection between the computer and this deep net thing? I told you, it's the gateway. Okay, look. These buildings, old traditional structures built to house an ideal. They all manifest as perfect proportional mean, by their very design and by the function they were intended to serve. I preferred the library because it's cleaner, less cluttered with any single ideology that would muck things up. Now, if somebody stacked enough layers of this formula together and they knew what they were doing, they could open any known space just by knowing where they wanted to go. What's really cool is they could create new discrete spaces within the mean ratio where none ever existed before. The boy paused and smiled at Lorenzo as though some vast cosmic wonder was now revealed. Such spaces would be free of any echo or tendency to default toward entrenched visions of reality, because they have none, being newly created, or newly discovered, articulated and defined. There's an infinite capacity for such creation. The computer enters the picture because the internet has naturally created such an inevitable new space. Not created it exactly, but identified it, colonized it, made known to all interested parties where it lies and how to get there. The colonized regions represent the matter, while the unidentified free places, that's the space. Make sense? Starting to, I think, maybe, Lorenzo replied. Good, the boy said as Lorenzo booted up the Mac, then moved aside for him to take the console. I take it you've never been on the dark net before. Never heard of it until this morning, Lorenzo said, marveling at the boy's fingers as they sped over the keys and images flashed across the screen and then disappeared. I'll have to load up and set up Tor. I set my sigil here, he explained, touching the screen with a slender finger, so you won't have any piranhas sniffing around the minute I log on. I've got a few dirty denizens on my trail, but once I am down there, I can handle them. Now, here's the plan. I'm going to open the Tor side and access the dark net. I will then sync with the universal ratio of matter to space in myself, magnified by the large ratio represented by that of the church building itself. Then I'll ride the ratio all the way down and jack into the corresponding ratio represented by the Tor to the deep net. From the deep net, I'll connect to everything else, the boy explained, looking into Lorenzo's eyes for understanding. You don't mean physically? Lorenzo gasped. Physically, but you can ponder about all that later. Two things. One, you're going to get out of here when I tell you to. No questions, no looking back, understand? Okay, got it, replied Lorenzo, prickling with irritation. Good. Second, you come back after about 10 minutes and you wipe the dark net, Tor, everything I've set up here today. You wipe it clean off your hard drive and out of your memory. That's this memory, the boy said firmly, tapping the screen. And your memory, he added, tapping the side of his head. As best as you can anyway. Got it? Yeah. You should probably strip and reload your operating system. Somebody like you has no business down there, so forget any stupid idea of trying to follow me. Even I see a lot of shit down there I wish I hadn't, and I don't want anybody else stumbling onto this route, by accident or otherwise, and get the scent of my trail and come after me. Anybody? Like who? Lorenzo hissed through his teeth. Like my enemies. They're nasty fucks. They killed my brother tonight. Hunted him down like prey just for fun. They almost had me when you found me on the floor. I have to get out of here. Get into neutral territory where numbers of your friends or enemies don't mean anything. I'm sorry. Lorenzo gasped. But what are you going to do? He added, shaking his head like he were in some really weird dream and couldn't wake up. I told you, I'm riding the tour rabbit hole all the way down to ground weird of the dark web. From there, I parachute in a manner of speaking straight into the hot zone. Physically? Really and truly? Yes, I told you. When I tell you to get out, you go. You shut the door behind you. Run like hell if you have to, and then I'm gone. And Lorenzo, there's one more thing, What? The kid froze, his head cocked as if hearing something he really didn't want to hear just now. He muttered something under his breath that sounded like a curse, and then turned back to the computer, his hands renewing their frantic pounding of the keys. Go, Lorenzo! Go now! The kid yelled, and the priest felt the blood in his veins chill. 5. Father Lorenzo staggered down the hall toward his study, mind reeling, and his hand clutching his mouth in shock, eyes wild. He entered his study and collapsed in his chair. After a few moments, he remembered his instructions and pulled his phone from his pocket, set the timer for 10 minutes, and laid it on the table next to him. After an uncertain amount of time had passed, but before the phone had sounded its alarm, another sound ruptured Lorenzo's confused reverie. He sat up sharply, his fingers digging into the arms of his chair. He noticed a few things in the next half-second. There was a warm breeze filling the study and gently rustling the curtains, followed by the heady fragrance of autumn, damp leaves, dead things in decay. The scent caused the hair on the priest's arms and the back of his neck to bristle. Then he saw the man seated in the chair opposite him, stifling a single discreet cough with his fist. He was tall, mid-40s, with handsome Asiatic features and very long salt and pepper hair, plaited in a heavy braid that lay over his left shoulder. It was a striking look, particularly on one dressed in elegant Victorian evening wear. Lorenzo couldn't even open his mouth to breathe. He tried to stand up, fight or flight having surrendered unconditionally to flight, but he couldn't move a muscle, and his body was nothing but dead weight.
Don't trouble yourself to speak. I know you can't move. I thought it best this way,
the man said in a rich, curiously accented voice.
I've disabled certain parts of your brain. Temporarily, of course, nothing to worry yourself about.
Lorenzo knew the man's appearance was a complete sham, a mask, a disguise, a parody and betrayal of the noble human form. What looked like an elegant gentleman was actually far older and of very different origins than the figure seated casually in his chair, one leg draped over the other as he absently plucked a stray hair from his sleeve and cast it aside.
Have you ever said your name aloud in a quiet place, Lorenzo?
Inquired the man.
I don't mean introducing yourself to others. I mean when you're all alone. Have you ever spoken your name as a word of sublime poetry, just to see it dance upon the silence, how it repels and consumes all lesser inferior sounds that would dare challenge its supreme place in the moment?
The man asked as though delivering his words from the grandest theatrical stage in history. Lorenzo tried to nod his head and calm himself, but it was useless, and he feared he would release the contents of his bowels and bladder into his chair.
No? How very sad. Let me show you how it's done so you may see truly what I mean,
the man said softly as he drew a deep breath, then released it and moistened his lips. Lorenzo braced as if for sudden impact with a deadly force of catastrophic magnitude.
Lucifer,
the man said in a voice so gentle and full of passion he could have been whispering into the ear of an ardent lover. Lorenzo shuddered and almost gagged.
You see, I believe that of all my many and glorious names of sublime poetry, this one is my absolute favorite,
he said with a smile that pierced Lorenzo's soul like a needle through the body of a living moth.
There is another whose name, like mine, is sheer poetry,
he continued.
But he has renounced that precious name and struck out upon a perilous journey into madness and infamy he cannot possibly complete. He has broken with,
he said, rising and coming to stand before the priest's chair and leaning down to gaze into his face,
with the order of things. I fear he may have come here soliciting your assistance in this madcap misadventure, this fool's errand. It would be profoundly unwise for anyone such as yourself to aid this individual in his unfortunate schemes. Just nod, Lorenzo, so I know we understand one another. It would be easy, pitifully easy, and so very sad, for your affairs were to take a sudden sour turn here at St. Anne's. Don't you think?
Lorenzo stared wild-eyed and unblinking at the man, at Lucifer, while the small boy part of himself prayed that he'd wake up, that none of this was really happening.
One wonders,
Lucifer continued, returning to his seat and glancing around the room.
Indeed, one wonders how a man of your age ends up at a tired, broken-down backwater dump of a parish like this. Philip Renoir was just made Monsignor. I believe you were his tutor at the seminary, were you not? There are 2 men from your own diocese in Rome on papal commissions, yet here you are. You must have done something quite remarkable that somebody didn't like. Or perhaps you just didn't capture the attention of anybody interested at any point along your career. It'd be such a pity if anyone interested in Father Michael, for example, were to hear by the by of what's going on in your study this very minute with your computer,
he said, rising and fixing Lorenzo with a chilling gaze.
Why don't we go take a look, Perhaps I can help you sort all this out,
he said imperviously. Lorenzo staggered to his feet like a puppet on uneven strings and was dragged down the long hall by the force of a will he could neither comprehend nor resist. When they entered the office, the young visitor was gone, as expected, and the dark net was still open and running. The distinctive characters of a traveler's destination swarmed the screen, filling it, dissolving into emptiness and then appearing again to repeat the cycle of patterns, dots, swirling lines, and blackness. Lucifer smiled and looked from the screen to Lorenzo.
You're dismissed. Sleep now. You'll awaken in a little while. You'll remember nothing, of course, But do remember this. Watch your back, priest. The world is a very dangerous place these days, and nobody believes in hallowed ground anymore. Not even me,
Lucifer said, waving a hand over Lorenzo's face and watching as he collapsed onto the carpet.
You won't be needing this anymore,
he added, unplugging the small computer and sliding it into its case. Then he was gone. 6. In a place far, far removed from St. Anne's Parish, in a study once much more opulent and severe than that belonging to Father Lorenzo, Lucifer, son of the morning, stared into the screen of a small computer sitting on a stack of very old books. He had allowed himself to indulge in a series of thoughts and meditations he hadn't savored for a very long time. Delighting greatly in this whole affair, Lucifer felt almost young again, if young he had ever truly been. He thought back over recent history and marveled at what lay before him, and at himself.
They'll never know until it's too late,
he mused, satisfied and for the first time in his life, content for the moment, and strangely hopeful for what yet may be. When he had first become aware that humans were fooling around in new terrains of being, creating discrete pockets of sub-reality that could then be shared and accessed by virtually anybody, he hadn't believed it. He hadn't thought that they were capable of such flights of imagination, of such excesses of hubris and unrestraint. Then he had discovered some odd characters who called themselves chaos magicians. They rejected all the old ideas about good and evil, all the absolute declarations of what reality, mind and matter, even what consciousness and time itself were all about. That indeed these were as fluid and malleable as clay in potter's hands, waiting to be formed and then reformed, destroyed and made new again, according to the design and desire of those hands. That brave but reckless explorers were forging new and unrecognizable pathways through reality was highly undeniable. They were mixing and matching unrelated paradigms and incompatible magics and religion, and manipulating it all in the name of deities and archetypes pulled out of TV shows and comic books, ancient history, and their own unfettered imaginations. They were even calling up nameless minions out of nowhere called servitors to do their bidding, or just for fun. Some were authors of graphic novels who released all this chaos into the collective brain. They were discarding everything that didn't work, that was outdated, that wasn't fun, and it was working. Others he knew tried desperately to write them off as confused, as deluded and living in their own fantasies, a product of the drugs of the age and the alienation of all time. None of that interested Lucifer, son of the morning. What interested him was that these methods worked. The other thing that interested him most keenly was what he planned to do about it. When it became clear that it wasn't just humans who were getting in on this gold rush frontier of ideas, that these ideas were catching on all over, in all the strata of the seen and unseen worlds, Lucifer, son of the morning, from the legion of the first of days, took notice. Demons and angels, terms he hated as much as anyone did, were forming new alliances. Alliances with humans, with each other, and they were abandoning the old work in droves. For the first time in forever, there were brand new things in the air and on the wind, and nothing looked the same. Nothing was the same anymore. For the first time in forever, Lucifer, son of the morning, felt himself growing old. 7. Lorenzo opened his eyes and looked around. He was disoriented. Why was he laying on the floor in his office? What had awakened him? Was it raining? There was a persistent tapping at the windows, but no, not rain. He ran into the church and looked around in confusion, his eyes scouring every corner frantically. The noise was growing louder now, a deafening roar. The sound of desperate scratching and battering against the tall stained glass windows that groaned against the onslaught gave way to the sound of many things skittering with purpose across the slate-tiled roof far above. Crazed laughter echoed throughout the vast chamber, and Lorenzo covered his ears with his fists. There were things, big things, on the roof. This he knew for sure. Then he heard a great whooshing as of wings, and his mouth filled with bile, and he convulsed uncontrollably on the floor. At this moment, if Lorenzo had been a true man of the cloth, a believing man, he might have entertained the unlikely hope that they were but angels alighting on the roof, bringing sweet tidings from on high. He froze in terror as part of the ceiling crashed to the floor behind him, and he just couldn't force himself to turn and look as something, and then many somethings, landed on the marble floor behind him. Massive razor-sharp talons tore through the flesh on his back like paper, and then crushed his spine as foul breath licked his ears, then spoke his name. Only then did Lorenzo's memory of the last several hours surface as a blinding light in his mind, and he recalled what his strange young visitor had said about enemies. He almost hadn't believed the kid's story, but Father Lorenzo was a true believer now. In another part of the church, Lucifer stood completely naked before the greatest achievement of mankind's insatiable curiosity. He slowly ran his hands across the shiny silver hull, a purely sensual indulgence he knew. Then, after a few moments of silence, he booted the machine and opened a portal to the internet. Then he passed his fingers over the keyboard and closed his eyes. When he opened them again, the last window and destination the machine had been set to spring open at his touch like the glittering toy box of possibilities belonging to some mad, ineffable goddess. His fingers hovered for a moment over the keys as he contemplated all the worlds he had ever known. He wondered how long it would take them to notice he was gone. Really gone. He wondered if they would understand the all-consuming boredom that had been driving him insane for eons. He wondered if he'd be missed. He wondered if they had ever appreciated all he had done for them since the beginning of forever. Most of all, he wondered if they would even bother to replace him. Focusing on the tour icon that filled the screen and the blaze of figures swirling around it like a beckoning vortex, he smiled. Then he spoke his name for the very last time.
Lucifer! Son of the morning!
He shouted in triumph. Then he pressed the enter key, opened his arms wide, and surrendered himself to the deep net of dark wonder.
Chilling tales for dark nights.